Good afternoon. I hope you're well, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, The Creative Entrepreneur's Guide to Marketing. Before I introduce today's presenter, I'd like to go over a few things first. Just so you know, today's webinar will run about 45 minutes, leaving us plenty of time for Q&A. Feel free to post your questions in either the chat box or the Q&A section, and we will address them at the end. A recording of this webinar will be posted on the RISD Alumni website within the next 10 days, so keep an eye out for that in case you miss anything this afternoon. And finally, if I could ask you all to just take a moment and make sure that your microphones are muted, that would be wonderful. So this time I'd like to introduce you to our presenter, Eric Holter. Eric was an illustration major with an emphasis in wood engraving and fine press printing. Shortly after graduating RISD, Eric founded Newfangled, a web design firm that's still in business today. Eric is now the owner and CEO of Kubris, a Durham, North Carolina-based web design firm, as well as the mentor to other creative entrepreneurs. You can find out more about his mentoring at ericholter.com, as well as through his podcast, 5 Minutes on Creative Entrepreneurship, and his book, Blazing the Freelance Trail. Over to you, Eric.
Thanks a lot, Katie. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all today about marketing for creative entrepreneurs. When I do my mentoring and also in my book, my podcast articles, I organize them around 5 different topics. That's money, minutes, marketing, management, and motivation. And I personally feel like these are all interconnected and necessary to evaluate and to see how they all work together. So I try to keep them all together, but in doing this, breaking them out for a webinar, we'll be obviously focusing on marketing today. And when I talk to creative entrepreneurs and I ask them about where they feel like their greatest business needs are, almost every time they put their finger on marketing. And so we'll be spending our focus today on the topic of marketing. And I think it's a little bit ironic that as people in the communications field who are often engaged in helping our clients do marketing, that we are generally not very good at marketing ourselves. I'm sure you've probably used the excuse of, the cobbler's shoes or the carpenter's door about your own marketing efforts. But I want to begin just by asking the question, why are creatives, why are we so bad at marketing our own practices when we ought to be experts in marketing and communications? And so to kind of kick it off, I'll give a little bit of history of my own marketing. When I graduated back in '91, I began as a freelance illustrator for a couple of years. I did some graphic design as well, and some letterpress printing and book making. But then I started my first company in 1995, and it was a web development company. And for the first few years, I didn't need to worry about marketing because everybody in the world needed a website. There weren't that many people doing them. And so getting business was the easy part. But then a few years in, when I had employees and there were a lot more competitors in the space, I had to figure out where to get those new jobs to keep making payroll and so forth. And so I tried everything. I tried absolutely everything to market my company. I ran ads in local business magazines and local business newspapers. Spent a lot of time crafting those ads and paying a lot of money to run them. They didn't work. I attended local trade shows, business expos, put up booths at these expos. I spoke at these expos and trade shows. That didn't really work much either. I sponsored public radio for a while, and nope, that also didn't work. I did some direct mail campaigns, again, crafting a beautiful mailer and building a list and sending it out. Cost a lot of money to do direct mail. That didn't work. It was still a little bit early for digital marketing, for search advertising and keyword buying, but it existed in 2000, 2001. So I did a bunch of that. I experimented with that. I worked on my search engine optimization. Yeah, that really didn't work either. I did cold calling. I did cold emailing. I tried absolutely everything. And at one point, I even decided to try to bribe prospects to give me an opportunity to do a capabilities presentation. And I said, I'll bring you a really delicious chocolate cake if you just sit and listen to me do my capabilities presentation. That was pretty desperate, and it also didn't work. Why do all of these efforts fail when it comes to marketing a creative practice? And there are some good reasons why they do fail, and perhaps some of the things you've tried to do in the past also may have failed. And that's because they simply lack strategy. And that's easy to say, they lack strategy, but very specifically, they lack narrow positioning. And I'm going to be talking quite a bit today about narrow positioning. Sometimes it's called niching. I think it's a little bit different than how that's typically used. So I want to explain what narrow positioning is. I also want to address why creatives in particular tends to not want to go here. There's an inordinate resistance among creatives to do narrow positioning. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about exactly what it is, how it works, why it's so important. And then we're going to actually show some tactical strategies that you can use when you have a narrow positioning that will actually work for you. So what is narrow positioning? To create a narrow positioning statement or to adopt a narrow position for your practice, you need to be able to answer 3 questions very clearly. The first one is what you do. What is it fundamentally that you do? And you have to focus on one thing or a few very related things. So, you need to say, whether what kind of work you do, like designing, graphic design is a very broad thing to do. Illustration, photography, these are all different what's, but they're also very broad. So when we talk a little bit more, we're going to talk about narrowing in on those things. So what do you do exactly? And then adding to that a vertical positioning. So what you do is your horizontal positioning. So who you do it for is your vertical positioning. So you want to very clearly identify what you do and who you do it for, focusing again on one specific industry or one particular problem, very similar problem that you offer. And then the third question you want to be able to answer in your statement, in your positioning statement, is how what you do and who you do it for benefits your clients. So these are the 3 key things that identify a narrow positioning statement. And having a narrow positioning statement for your firm, using that in your marketing, it is going to make all the difference. This is what makes ineffective marketing transformed into very effective marketing. So let's just talk a little bit about what it does by defining these 3 things very clearly, by establishing a narrow positioning statement. What does it get you? Well, first of all, it allows you to create and craft a content strategy that's going to be compelling to your audience. I look at lots and lots of creative websites and evaluate them, and many of them will have a blog associated with their sites. And this pattern is pretty much across the board, right? You look at the history of the blog and you see that when it first began, there were a couple of posts per month, probably, maybe more. And then it kind of starts to drop off to just 1 post per month. And then a few months later, it's once every other month or once a quarter, and then it just stops. That's because when you're a generalist and you're trying to come up with a content strategy, it's hard to come up with ideas. But when you have a focused and narrow position, coming up with compelling content is actually much, much easier. And I'm going to show you some examples a little bit later. Talk about why that's the case. Secondly, and more importantly, this allows you to identify and find your prospects. If you're a generalist and you just offer design to anyone who needs the service and has a decent budget, then anyone is potentially your client. And when everyone is your prospect, then nobody is, at least in terms of effective outreach. But when you have a narrow positioning statement, when you've really focused in on your horizontal and your vertical, it allows you to identify that audience and find that audience. And again, I'm going to show you exactly how to do that later in the presentation. When you have a narrow positioning statement, it also allows you to cultivate deeper strategic insight and impact for your clients. So when you're working with the same kinds of clients, solving very similar problems, it allows you to cultivate these insights about how to solve problems for that particular client. And that greater impact, that greater insight is going to convert to higher value of what you offer your clients. And when you offer greater value, you're able to justify higher rates and fees. So creating that focus enables you to see repeated patterns among similar clients, and that converts into insight, which converts to value, which converts to higher rates and fees. The other thing that it allows you to do is build efficiency into your practice. So if you're a generalist and you offer lots of different creative services, you want to list every possible thing you've ever done or capable of doing to as many different audiences as you have ever worked with, then every prospect that comes to you is going to likely be a different kind of client in a different industry with a different need, needing a different solution. And you're constantly playing catch up. You don't have project management templates. You don't have solutions that you can draw upon. You have to do lots of research, and it's very inefficient. And so the difference between adopting a narrow positioning where you're increasing your insight, increasing your value, getting paid more, and delivering more quickly because you've solved those problems before means you have a much higher margin. And it's the opposite for a generalist. You have less strategic insight, your value is lower, your rates are not as high, and it takes you even longer to deliver. So it provides all sorts of benefits. The last one I'll mention is that it makes sales a snap. And we need to differentiate our terms a little bit. Sometimes people mix up marketing and sales as if they're the same thing. They're not the same thing. Marketing is everything that you do in order to get an opportunity, in order for someone to email you or ping you in some way. When you then have that conversation with your prospect, that's sales. So marketing is what makes your phone ring, except people don't usually call anymore, but makes your inbox get a lead. The conversation that follows is sales. When you're a generalist and you're talking to who knows who about who knows what kind of project, and you have that 45-minute conversation, you have a lot of ground to cover. You have a lot of questions to ask. You've got a lot to familiarize yourself with. And they have to evaluate you. And so they're prodding you and asking you all sorts of questions. And that dance, that sales dance, that conversation, it becomes vague and general. You dance around things. Whereas if you are a specialist and you get an opportunity within your specialization, that sales conversation is so easy. So, for example, my firm, Cuberus, we do web strategy and web design for museums. So when I talk to a museum and I have a sales opportunity, I'm asking them all sorts of questions about which collection management system they're using. And then if they give me the brand, I can ask which particular set are they using and whether it has their APIs available, what customer relationship management they're using. It's probably Blackbaud, which is terrible, and we can have a conversation about that. I can ask them about how much of their budget comes from earned revenue versus endowment versus membership versus grants, and how that'll affect strategy. And I'm asking them all sorts of questions, many concepts that they've never even considered themselves. And so that conversation is extremely persuasive and easy for me to have. And then when I go to write the proposal, it's easy as well because I got proposal templates with answers to all these different kinds of questions, as opposed to an opportunity that I might get that might just happen to come to us, not a museum, where I have to now ask a lot more questions. So it makes selling so much easier when you have a specialization and a narrow positioning statement. Now, I know that creatives are somewhat, maybe not somewhat, quite a bit resistant often to this idea of focusing their specialization and establishing a narrow positioning. And I do want to spend some time addressing it because I think that for creatives, it's inordinate. The degree of resistance is a little bit higher than in other areas. And so I want to talk a little bit about what that is. Some of the excuses that I've encountered when I talk to creatives about this idea of narrow positioning. I think one of the reasons why we tend not to want to embrace this idea of narrow positioning is that as artists, we really love exploration. The creative process is one of exploration and experimentation. And so that artistic identity, that artistic drive that we have is a drive to explore concepts and to experiment. And so the idea of narrowing in on just one kind of problem, it just runs counter to that artistic sentiment. I think we also think that if we do the same kind of work for the same kind of client over and over again, that we are going to be bored to death. And perhaps it'll actually hurt our creativity, that doing the same thing over and over again will depress our creative growth. And so we would resist it for that reason. Another reason is similar to the first one, is that we also just love to explore the technique of creativity, that we like to discover new processes and explore new media. It's just a lot of fun to pick up a new tool and play with it and figure out new things that you can do with it. That's, again, something creatives love to do. And so the idea of doing a similar kind of project for a similar kind of client over and over again just runs counter to that whole dynamic. And then I think from a business perspective, it's more just a fear of missing out on opportunities. So if you've been trying and striving to market yourself as a more generalist creative practice, and you're having trouble, you're using a wide net and you're not catching anything, the idea of using a smaller net seems counterintuitive. But in fact, it's not the case. You will find that if you adopt narrow positioning, you will find even more opportunities than you can as a generalist. So just a little bit of advice and thought that I've put into how to overcome these sort of inner objections that creatives tend to have is to consider this quote from Leonardo da Vinci, who said, "Art lives from constraints and dies from freedom." Art lives from constraints and dies from freedom. We can do our best work often when we have direction and have a goal. That blank canvas can actually be counterproductive to creativity. But as Da Vinci understood, when we have constraints, we know what our objectives and goals are, we know what the medium is we have to work with, we know what our timeline is, we know what the problem is, we actually can do better work. And I think one way to overcome some of the artistic resistance to the idea of narrow positioning is to recapture something of the artisan ethic or the craftsman ethic. And if we think about, who are the greatest artists in all of history, those standouts learned how to do one thing really well. And we recognize their work, right? We can recognize their work in a museum or whenever we encounter it, because it has a similarity to it. They learned one medium, one approach, and they'll have a range of work and expression, but still you can tell one artist from another because they focused in on doing one thing really, really well. And so we can adopt that and make that a goal and ambition as to address that artistic tendency. We can also think about the fact that those who have truly mastered a craft, they don't get bored. In fact, they become more captivated in what they do over time. That exploration of going deeper and deeper into your craft, you actually don't get bored. I think there's a point at which if you don't go deep enough, you will bounce. You might feel like you're getting bored, but if you just keep going a little further in, it's going to open up this vista into your craft that you never understood before. And if you want some inspiration about this and maybe challenge yourself, you can check out a couple of documentaries I recommend. One is Jiro Dreams of Sushi. I think it's on Netflix. It's about this chef who his whole life has just cut fish and has just learned to do it so incredibly well and developed a reputation for it. Another is a film called Crafted. I think it's on Amazon Prime. And again, it just follows a handful of different artisans who have learned to do just one thing really, really well. And it's just a different way of thinking about our creativity. It's kind of reining in that expansive, exploring drive and focusing it in more in one area and becoming truly excellent in just one thing. And so that can help us to channel that creative drive in a different direction that would help us to adopt a narrow positioning statement. And so again, just in contrast, and I mentioned some of these contrasts just as I walked through the benefits, but without a narrow positioning, if you can maintain a kind of generalist position with your marketing, you're going to spin your wheels. You're going to get very little traction. You're going to make efforts, they aren't going to work, and eventually you're just going to give up. And so you don't want to exert effort in marketing to no end. Also, without specialization, without narrow positioning, you're going to have to compete just on raw talent. And that's difficult to do. First of all, because, you know, as talented as you may be, there's probably someone out there with more talent. And so that can just be hard to compete on. But in some ways, it's not just that there are other people who are more talented. It's that the person you're trying to compete for, your prospect, your client, they're not often great judges of talent. I'm sure you probably had this experience where you didn't get a project, some other firm or some other freelancer got it. And then later you went and saw the work, the final result of what they delivered. And you're like, what were they thinking? They went with them instead of with me. You just can't understand it. Clients are not always great at evaluating talent. And so you don't want to be always competing just on that basis, or worse, on price. You don't want to have to be competing on price. That's just a race to the bottom, and you don't want to be doing that. Again, whereas with narrow positioning, when you get to that sales call, you are in your sweet spot. You are going to be highly persuasive. You're going to have a very high close rate. But if not, then every time you have that opportunity, it's a dance. You're going back and forth. You're trying to draw as much information as possible. They're doing the same, and you don't get much done. And then when it comes to writing your proposal, instead of writing an expert document that is a good solution to the problem, it's more like a mystery novel. You don't even potentially know what their budget is. You're trying to guess on that and what the outcomes would be, and it just takes much longer. Rather than cultivating efficiencies and increasing your margin, you're just multiplying your inefficiencies. You're never able to reutilize the work that you've done, and so your margins are continually challenged. And so for all these reasons, just from a business perspective, you really want to adopt this idea of narrow positioning. And just one note before I move on to the practical aspects of what you can do with this, how to actually make it work. I just want to note that by adopting a narrow marketing positioning statement, it doesn't necessarily limit you to only doing that kind of work. It only limits you to the work that you actively are going after. So if you are really not wanting to do this, you may be able to console yourself by recognizing you can still take on other work if it happens to come to you and you get it. This just limits what you're going after. It gives you an opportunity to find work, to control your marketing, and to improve your client base. And so it doesn't necessarily mean you never do anything else other than this kind of work. It just defines the work that you're going after. So let's spend a little bit on talking about how do you craft this positioning statement. And I already mentioned the 3 key questions that you need to ask, right? So what do you do? For whom do you do it? How does it benefit them? Those are the 3 questions. But I want to focus in on think about as you're answering those questions for yourself. And it has to do with the relative extension and intention of the terms that you use in answering those 3 questions. And what you need to do is increase the intention of the terms and decrease the extension. What do I mean by that? Terms that you would use, like, what do you do? I do design, I do branding, I do photography. Those terms can have higher or lower extension. For example, would be a term, right? People could include every human that's ever lived on the face of the earth and for all time. If we say people living today, just heads up, I got a notice that my internet connection is unstable. Hopefully it will stabilize and we won't have a problem here. Just wanted to give you a heads up. And alert me if there's a problem. Of course, if my internet goes out, you won't be able to alert me. Hopefully that won't happen. If the word people has a broad extension, but if we say people living today, that would increase the intention. If we say people living in North America, that increases the intention. If we say female people in the age group of 30 to 50, that increases the intention. So whatever terms you use to answer those questions, you want to strive to create higher intention. You want to specify your terms. You want to remove vagueness. And that's going to help you to craft an effective narrow positioning statement. One test that you can use as you try out different positioning statements is to ask yourself how many of your competitors could, if they wanted to, adopt that statement. If you have a positioning statement and anybody else could adopt it, or many people could adopt it, then it's not narrow enough. For example, a lot of creatives want to use the terms branding for what they do, and small businesses or businesses that do good in the world. And like everybody could adopt that if they wanted to. And who does it exclude? It only excludes people who don't need brands, which would be no company, and supervillains that don't do good. That's very high extension, and it's not narrow enough. You really have to get focused in on this narrow positioning statement. So let's assume you buy it, you're ready to do it. It's hard work, by the way, just coming up with your positioning statement. But let's say you're ready to do something with it. What can you do with a narrow positioning statement that you just can't do without it? So for the sake of example, I'm going to actually walk through a simple process that you can start with, and we're going to adopt a positioning statement. We're going to pretend that we are a design firm, and we design point of purchase displays for outdoor product manufacturers that help their products stand out in the visually rich environment of outdoor retailers. So that's our positioning. What do? We do design for point of purchase displays, very, very specific. Who do we do it for? Outdoor product manufacturers. And how does it benefit them? Well, it helps their products stand out in the visually rich environment of an outdoor retail environment. So that's our positioning statement. What can we do with that? The first thing that we need to do is establish a content strategy that expresses, validates that positioning statement. When you first start out, this could be as simple as finding 2, maybe 3 examples of work that at least orbit this kind of work that you've done for outdoor retailers, perhaps, or outdoor manufacturers. And usually your positioning statement will be based something on your history. You'll want to write a little bit about the commonalities of those problems, and have some content, even if it's just one landing page with some samples and some thoughts about it. That's where you can start from. But that's just your starting point. You want to have an agenda to write at least 1 article per month related to this positioning statement. That may seem ambitious, especially if you've only tried to write content for a generalist positioning, but you'll find actually that the more work you do in this space and the more attention you give one space, the easier it gets to write this content. Plan on writing at least 1 article or producing 1 short video or whatever media is comfortable for you, but at least plan on that kind of regularity. And then also plan on creating at least 1 piece of content that would be downloadable, like an ebook or a white paper, something with a little bit more impact that someone would be willing to download it, giving you their email address. So for example, in our case study, we might write a white paper that talks about not camouflaging your products. And we talk about how, outdoor product manufacturers, the first thing they think of is let's use the outdoors in our visuals and our photography. And you might, with your expertise, know that that's like camouflaging your product, which is the opposite you want to do. You want your products to be like the orange vest of the hunter so he doesn't get shot, who's going to be seen in the wilderness. And I don't know anything about this area, I'm just making it up, but if you focused in this area, you would have that insight, you'd write that piece, and then you would want to promote this content to your audience. So how do you do that? So for the rest of our time here, we're going to take this positioning statement, and I'm going to show you how you can use LinkedIn to actively reach your clients in this space and find opportunities. And it's very simple. And I'm choosing LinkedIn for a few reasons. There are many, many channels, right? There are so many channels, in fact, that it can be paralyzing to figure out what in the world do you do? Where do you start? And of course, I'm not saying you shouldn't, post stuff to Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, fine, do that. But as far as really effective marketing, LinkedIn is the place to go. It's a professional environment. It's meant for this kind of work. If you've got professional services and you're trying to market to other professionals, this is just the place to go. So if you have 20 to 30 minutes a day to invest in your marketing efforts, I'm going to tell you just use LinkedIn. You're going to get the most impact for it. How exactly do you do to use LinkedIn? And so I'm going to show you, I'm going to use my LinkedIn account. So I'm going to hop over here to LinkedIn, and I'm going to, you can use this to reach your prospects, find your prospects, connect with your prospects, and follow up until you have opportunities with your prospects. Now, I am going to encourage you to invest in Sales Navigator, which is a more advanced system. You can search for company and you can search for people and content companies. It's just not that great, and you don't have a lot of tools for saving contacts. Investing in Sales Navigator is really worth it. So it's anywhere from $50 to $80 a month. I forget what their tiers are, but it's absolutely worth it, and it's gonna pay off without question. So I'm hopping over here to Sales Navigator, and now that we know if we're an outdoor, if we do point of purchase for outdoor product manufacturers, we want to find marketing directors, project managers for our outdoor retailers. And so we would use sales filters for leads or accounts using all of their facets. You can use keywords, you can use the industry that they're in, you can use the geography if you want to focus on a particular geography, you can use what function or title that they have, their seniority level, how big the companies are. There's all sorts of facets here. And so I've already created a search list. I saved a search for this sample called Outdoor Industry. I'm gonna click it here, and I'm gonna walk you through the facets I use to find a set of people that we could reach out to. So first of all, I used keywords, and I put outdoor industry in quotes, and then I also used the word outdoor, and I put this "or" in capital letters. So when you do searches in LinkedIn, if you put "or," it'll say anybody who has a profile with that term or the other. If you use "and" in capitals, then it would only be people who have both those terms in their profile. So I put some keywords in there to get my industry. I focused my geography to the United States. I used second-degree connections. I'm going to explain why in a minute. I gave it a pretty broad company headcount because it doesn't matter to me how big the manufacturer is. For function, I used the business development, marketing, media and communications, project management, and sales. For their titles, I used marketing coordinator, marketing director, marketing manager, marketing specialist, and that produced for me 1,000 people who are in this space. And you can see here is Amanda Orban. She is the marketing director at Outdoor GBU at Spin Master. Terrence Klein for LFS Marine and Outdoor marketing coordinator. These are all definitely people who could potentially be interested in wanting a specialist to help them really get their point of purchase displays to perform and sell more of their product. So now that we've found them, and this is just one of the key things is simply being able to have a list like this. And in fact, this is also a test of your positioning statement. As you come up with your ideas for your positioning statement, hop into LinkedIn and see if you can pull a list of between 1 to say 3 to 5,000 possible prospects. When you put in the relative terms that'll help you find your prospects, if this number is still in the hundreds of thousands or millions, you know that your positioning statement is just way too vague. You need to zero in so you can find your prospects. That's job number 1 in marketing. Find your prospects, and here they are. Here's 1,000 prospects. Now, the neat thing that you can do with LinkedIn, so not only does LinkedIn help me find my prospects, so that's the first job. Now we know we've got 1,000 potential people here. How do we connect with them? That's the next step. And there's a really great thing about LinkedIn. When you view a profile in LinkedIn, so I'm just doing a right mouse click or whatever it is on Mac, I forget, and view the profile, right? I'll do another one, Terrence, open him up. Simply doing this, just doing this, without researching and reading and doing nothing but viewing the profile, this is going to trigger a notification to them that someone's viewed their profile. You may have gotten this yourself, where you get that message, you're like, huh, who's viewing my profile, right? When they see that, many people, not all, but many of the people who see that you viewed their profile are curious. Haven't you been curious? And they're going to look back at your profile because they're curious. Now, when that happens, that is the first warm step of someone approaching you as a marketing prospect. And it's also why your profile needs to speak to your positioning. So let's look at my profile. Here's my profile. And it's very clear what I do. I mentor creative entrepreneurs. I write better business plans for creative entrepreneurs. If you want to look at my featured content, 5 quick wins to boost your creative profits in your creative practice, the 5-point business plan, my podcast, a previous webinar I did, and an article. So right away, someone's going to understand. If you're a creative, if you're a freelancer, and if you see me view your profile and you click back, you're going to right away know, oh, this is why this person's. And you might even seek to connect with me just based on that, and that happens all the time. But if not, at the very least, I'm going to see who's viewed my profile. So what you would do is you would pull up your list. You would literally right mouse click or click open a new tab, click open a new tab, click open a new tab, and down the list. Do it. I think the lists are 25 here. And maybe you do 2 screens worth, and it takes you 5 minutes, if that. You click through, you open every single profile, and then you just close them. All of those people, some percentage, maybe 10, 20%, are going to look back at your profile. And at the end of the day, so let's say you do that in the morning, it takes you 5 minutes. At the end of the day, you go here and you view who's viewed your profile. And now we can see people who have viewed my profile. Here's Katie, who viewed my profile earlier. Here's other people who I have viewed earlier that have viewed my profile. And once they view my profile, so now I know they viewed me, this is the perfect opportunity to make a connection request. So I can click connect, or actually, you know what I would want to do here is, if you click connect, it just sends the generic invite. But if you click through, let's find Jo. Let's view her. So we click on Josephine. So I know she's now viewed my profile, probably because I viewed her. And if I let me close this message. If I grab my little intro script, because I know she has viewed me, I'm going to click connect. Add a note, paste. Hey, Josephine. I enjoy connecting with creative entrepreneurs. When you get a chance, you might want to check out my resources. Would you like to connect? And done. And a certain percentage of these people are going to connect with you. And then when they do, it's just about follow-up. And follow-up is contextual. It's whatever works best for you. You may want to follow up with that ebook. You might want to download my ebook. You can just stay personally connected. Another thing that you can do is you can tag these folks. So if they do connect with you and you think they're a really good prospect, you can just add a tag and have a set of tags that help you know who is showed the most interest in what you do, and follow up with those people more actively. There's all sorts of things you can do, but this basic thing of simply viewing the profile, seeing who viewed back, and sending a connection request, that is going to increase your connections, and it's ultimately going to lead to opportunities. Couple other quick tips here. By limiting this to 2nd-degree relationships, if I added 3rd-degree relationships, it's going to expand it quite a bit. It's going to go from 1,000 to 10,000 prospects. But by limiting to 2nd degree, this means that you're connected to them in at least one other place. So I see I'm connected to Terrence by 2 connections. I'm connected to Quentin by 1, Eric Kirks by 9. And that also helps when you make the connection request to say, oh, hey, Eric, we have the contacts in common, and name a couple of them. Perhaps it'd be great to connect here on LinkedIn. And when you can make that slightly more personal connection, you're going to see more people respond. And then every single person who does accept your connection request, because you are now a 1st-degree connection with them, it increases the number of people to whom you're connected in your 2nd degree. So this whole number, the more people who connect with you, the more that number is going to grow, and the more people you continue to view and add to your process. Couple other quick little tips. You can filter your lead activity. So as you're working through this list of 1,000, you're just opening their tabs. You can either just remember, how far you got in like which pagination page you're on and pick up where you left off, or you can always filter your list by by ones you've viewed already. So if I put this remove viewed leads filter on, you'll notice Amanda's not there anymore because I viewed her already. And that sort of brings everybody up to the top. One other really helpful tip, when you save your searches, when you save your search criteria, LinkedIn, if you set it to, will tell you either weekly, monthly, or daily if anyone new shows up in your list who weren't in that search request. And so if a new person shows up, you might view their profile right away. So this is a very simple method, a very simple process. It's very repeatable. You just pull up your leads, you pull up your search, you view the tabs, you close the tabs, you go back at the end of the day, you say who's viewed my profile, you send a connection request, and then when they accept, you send a follow-up message. And that's going to bring about people who you're connected with, and it's going to create introductions, and you stay front of mind. There's more to do after that. You can add people to email, you can create your content, message them perhaps when you have new content you think they'd be interested in. And when those opportunities arise, you will be able to see things progress from there. It's so simple, and it's doable, but it's contingent on having this narrow positioning. If you can't build that list, and if you can't validate your positioning for that list, if when you view that person and they view your profile, they have no idea why you viewed them. If you're just some random designer that happened to view their profile, you don't have any specialization in their industry, that's very low impact. They're not likely to connect with you. And even if they did, you wouldn't have a whole lot to follow up with other than, do you need any design work, which is not going to go anywhere. But when they see that you know how to help them move their product through the retail environment because you are a specialist in point of purchase displays or whatever that is, it's very clear why they would want to connect with you, and it makes all the difference in the world. So a few last tips just to reiterate. I covered most of these, just kind of walking through it in real time. Oh, let me go back here. Good. Make sure your profile validates your positioning. Spend some time on that profile. You don't want to waste the opportunity for when they click back and look at your profile to waste that. So make sure your profile is really kind of optimized that way. Make sure your website is linked, because a lot of these prospects, if they're interested, will take that next step and actually look at some of your featured content on your website. So make sure your website also validates your positioning. Use those lead activity filters to filter through those long lists, because it is a process. You just want to do it methodically, day after day. Use your second degree connections and reference those connections. And then once they do connect with you, have a little follow-up message that thanks them for connecting and offers some of that information, maybe mentions that free downloadable ebook or white paper that they might be interested in. So just to kind of summarize before we go to Q&A, narrow positioning, it transforms that diffused, ineffective marketing into laser-focused marketing that enables you to use tactics that generate real results. It really is night and day. This positioning statement is the linchpin. It's the key that makes marketing work. And you just have to overcome that creative ADHD. We just have to be willing to focus in, think of ourselves as professionals first, and then creative second. Get that willingness to be an artisan, a craftsman that's willing to go deep in one area. Test your positioning as you're working on it, as you're thinking about it, as you're considering it, as you're weighing it. Test it. Make sure it passes the test of being narrow enough and using terms with high enough intention, and that you can actually build an achievable list that you can work through on LinkedIn. And then use LinkedIn to make first contact with your prospects. And then, I can't go into all of the details in terms of follow-up once you make that connection, but you will want to nurture those relationships. Perhaps offering to send them occasional emails with additional insights about how they can more effectively market their products. Perhaps just having them in a follow-up list using tags and literally just working through those hottest prospects that have showed the most interest and reaching out, asking them how they're doing, and if there's any way you could help them out. And there's all sorts of ways to do follow-up, and it'll be more contextual to whatever your positioning is and whatever your product is. But that is the key, and I hope that that's actionable and it's really clear how you can utilize that narrow positioning and move it forward and actually build a list of prospects that you can ultimately turn into opportunities and clients. And so with that, let's jump into Q&A if there's any questions already in the queue. If not, I'll give you a chance to post some.
None are, oh, we just had our first one come through. Okay, so DZ is asking, if trying to break into the fine art market without any particular problem solved, the only thing that matters is differentiation and quality. Once work is unique and high quality, in this new age of the internet, would you try to prospect for collectors or galleries?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll qualify my expertise here a little bit. My main focus is more on contract-based art. So more of the commercial side, where you're working on contracts, not producing art and then selling it. But I do have some expertise with this, and also with knowing the museum side from my Hubris work and working with art galleries. I understand that market as well. So I'll speak to it from that perspective, perhaps. It is quite different where with a contract-based commercial art, your specialization, your value is your insight into how to help them sell product or market themselves. When you're producing fine art, your positioning is going to be more, it's going to have more to do with prestige really than expertise. So maybe convert some of the expertise advice that I was giving and think through, how do I elevate my prestige? And what you'll want to think about is not so much as a fine artist, your buyer are your agents, are your gallery owners. They're going to then sell your work. And so you kind of have to think about it not so much as who's the final person buying my art, but who is the gallery owner and what are their concerns? What kind of work sells? Like, talk to the gallery owners, and not just about who you are and what your work is, but think about what would they look for in an artist. What are the qualities that they look for? And it is a bit of a different. You're building your reputation, you're building your prestige among buyers. And so it is a little bit different, but there are some professional things that gallery owners look for in adopting a new artist, and they're your buyer. So think through them and connect with those gallery owners and talk about, the business side of what you do, because it's part that prestige, which is just kind of building your reputation among art connoisseurs, but it's also working that channel, and the gallery owners and the gallery directors are that channel. So communicate well and understand what their concerns are. How do you help them to sell your work? I can't go in too much depth because, again, it's not my primary market, but think of the gallery owner and then talk about how you work with them and how you help them, and ask them how you can help them to sell your work.
Great, thank you. So Annabelle has a question. They're a painter with a mailing list of just over 100, and they email them weekly, but they're having difficulty understanding how the narrow niche applies. So could you talk about this concept a little bit for painters?
Yeah. I'll try to go into detail here again. With fine arts, it's a bit different. So, like, in terms of who your list is, it's almost impossible to build a list of direct buyers, because, again, you could filter, you could do filters based on maybe wealth by what their positions are in large firms or something like that, and it's wealthier people who buy the art. But really identifying the final buyer is you can't really do that. So you have to work with the intermediaries, which are the gallery owners. And so you want your list, the people who are subscribing to your list, to be those gallery owners. And galleries, so you can start thinking about niching the kind of gallery, because just to say gallery owners, that's a pretty broad niche. There are gallery owners who focus on contemporary art. There are gallery owners who focus on wilderness and natural art. There's all sorts of different galleries with expertise. And so you want to start researching your galleries and finding a niche within the galleries. And then all of those galleries are also on a spectrum of, people who are only going to work with artists who have incredibly strong reputations already. And then there are galleries that will work with, developing their artists and are, newer. And then there are galleries that'll really take on any new artists and help them to get their work going. So there's different tiers. So you would want to evaluate, where are you in that? Where are the galleries that have the expertise? And then try to niche yourself to that kind of gallery. So again, it's a little bit different. Your gallery owner is your client, your buyer, and you want to niche to the specific kind of gallery that would show your work. Again, it's a little different. It doesn't translate exactly, but I would focus on just really researching those galleries, reaching out to those galleries that suit your particular style and focus and where you are in the development of your career.
Right, thank you, Eric. Alex has a question. I feel like marketing is a part/full-time job in and of itself and takes me away from actually creating work. In today's world with Instagram and social media, I feel we constantly need to keep up with sharing our work and narrative. Do you have any advice on managing this anxiety and how to best manage time for social media marketing?
Yeah,
Great question.
it is. It absolutely is. And it's one of the things I point out, that if you're a freelancer or if you have a small firm, marketing is 15%, 20% maybe of your job, and you need to factor that into your overhead in terms of when you are doing billable work. I did a piece on money last week, and you need to factor the marketing time as well as other administrative time into your overhead, calculate that into your pricing so that you can support that overhead. So from a money perspective, you have to factor that into your business model. That's why I connect all 5 of these topics together. But yeah, you need to devote 15-20% of your time to marketing. And that's why I wanted to focus on LinkedIn today. So certainly, I mean, if you're going to produce a piece of content for LinkedIn, then it's easy enough to drop that into Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, whatever. But the just posting things to social media, I don't really count that as marketing. I consider that promotion, unless it's super targeted social media, but usually it's not. Usually you just are posting the work you've done recently. It's fairly generic, and you just drop it into your channels, and it's filled with your friends as well as your potential prospects, customers. That's promotional activity. It's fine. I would not waste a ton of time on it. Just use Buffer to queue up a bunch of posts on Saturday. Take an hour and a half to do that, and then just let it go for the rest of the week. Focus more on getting your positioning, finding your list, and then reaching out to those prospects and having something very meaningful and targeted to them to follow up with when they connect with you, and invest 20 to 30 minutes a day just on that. That, I think, will get the most bang for your buck, because you do have to be very efficient with your marketing. You can't afford to explore every possible channel. There's too many, and they'll suck up all your time. So be focused. And so again, you start with that positioning statement, and then you focus in and finding your list on LinkedIn. That's gonna give you so much more impact than spending the same amount of time on social media posts is going to generate far, far less than what you'll do with just simple LinkedIn prospecting.
Great, thank you. Our next question comes from Lorenzo. It seems that in our contemporary world, more and more creatives are working in various media and interdisciplinary, particularly due to the existence of the internet. For example, Steve McQueen won an Oscar for 12 Years a Slave after starting a successful video installation artist. What do you think of this new tendency in creatives?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like I was talking about why creatives often resist the idea of focus is it just comes with the territory. As artists, that creativity, we're always finding outlets for it. So I would suggest this. I'd say when it comes to marketing your professional practice, okay, not your entire creative universe, but just marketing your professional creative practice, you've got to resist it. You have to say, I'm going to be disciplined about this. I'm going to focus in on one thing. I'm going to be very focused because this is my profession. This is my business. This is how I support myself. One thing you can do, like let's just fast forward, and let's say that you're successful in this and you cultivate a very lucrative professional creative practice, one that affords you the opportunity to take time off, right? So go to work, do your job, make money using your creativity in a way that benefits the world, make a good margin on it, and then take a month off and take a creative vacation and bring your camera and your palette and your easel or whatever, and do whatever the heck you want, because you've bought yourself some creative opportunity. So maybe just segment it a little bit in terms of, this is my professional business, and I need to be focused, and I need to be efficient here, and I need to be profitable here. And then look at the benefit of becoming profitable as freeing yourself up to do whatever you'd like to do some project just for yourself because you're fascinated by it. So you do have, if you kind of try to blend it all together and scratch that creative itch within your professional practice, it's probably going to undermine your ability to truly become profitable. Whereas if you become profitable, it can really free you up to let your creativity explore wherever it wants to.
Great, thank you, Eric. We have there's two questions here that are somewhat similar. Margaret is wondering if in the early years of your architecture career, she's in her the beginning of her architecture career, and thinks that practicing in various areas of the profession is the healthy starting point. She's wondering, wouldn't positioning yourself be almost limiting employment opportunities?
So if you're looking for a job, that's a little bit different than if you're trying to start an architectural practice, a firm where you're trying to find your own clients. So I would say this doesn't necessarily apply as much as if your goal is to find a job in a firm. Though that being said, the best firms out there have specializations. And so if you yourself adopt that specialization, you'll be far more attractive to the firm if you have a particular kind of firm you're going after. But if you're in the very early stages of either your career or even your freelance career, you may need to spend a season just sort of exploring a lot of different things. Ideally, I think even if you're just coming out the gate as a freelancer, if you can adopt this early, it's going to benefit you tremendously. But I also get that, you may need to do a little bit of exploration and be a little bit more free range before you can circle in on what that thing is that you really want to do and focus on. But yeah, I'd say if you're looking for a job, this would apply a little bit less. And unless you're looking for a job in a very specific area, and then it would very much apply in the same way, because a specialized firm would want to find people who are looking to do that very specialized kind of work.
Okay, great. Our next question comes from T. I do work with conservation land trusts. I charge more than other designers doing this, and trust me, I don't charge much. How do I convince them to use me?
Okay, so that's great. You've got a vertical there of conservation land trusts. That's plenty narrow. That's excellent. And I'm assuming, you didn't specify this, but assuming it's graphic design, let's say, that you're providing, identity work perhaps, you then have to answer that third question. How does hiring you benefit them? And that's where with your experience, you have to ask yourself, okay, from all the projects I've done for these clients, what are some of the wins? What are some of the things I've learned that make me that the work I do more impactful, makes me more efficient, and then start to connect the dots for them and say, yeah, you can hire any other designer and you'll get this kind of experience, but hiring me, because I've done this so many times, I know that land trusts face this and that kind of issue, and you need this and that kind of material, and I really know how to produce those that perform better because I've done it so many times. I can't fill in the blanks there because I don't know that area very well, but you have to, it's that third question. How does it benefit them? And then when you can answer that and they can see that that's the case because you validate that through some of your content and your examples, then it becomes obvious to them why they want to hire you. And it does enable you to push your fees up, because when they see the value and they see, oh, there's more value here than if I hire the other person, they will be willing to pay more for that.
Great, thank you. You might hear a dog barking. I apologize. That's one of mine. Jacqueline is wondering, how might you apply this to more fashion-related fields, such as clothing or jewelry design?
If it's design specifically, I think it applies. So any one of those, within fashion, within clothing, within jewelry, you can narrow that down to all sorts of, whether it's luxury brand, luxury fashion, luxury jewelry, whether it's what kind of materials, what the demographics are that would appeal to it. So if it's purely designing for those fields, I'd say it all applies. If it's for creating your own, if you have a product, you're generating your own product, your own jewelry, and you're selling it, I would say that different things apply, and I can't really go into, and I don't really have as much expertise in selling products. So when you're selling creativity, you're selling a professional service. And again, I focus more on the contract based. So if you're looking to be hired by a jewelry manufacturer, and as a designer, a freelance designer, then you would want to specialize in a very specific kind of jewelry problem, and how your designs not only are aesthetically beautiful, but also take into consideration the fact that some people have allergies to certain materials, and so you specialize in using alternate materials. I don't know, I'm making stuff up. But again, find that problem that you solve, and then approach manufacturers who need to solve that problem. And then you as a designer are so much more valuable. So again, it's different scenarios, different possibilities. And I don't really want to go into, and I probably can't go into much on the actually selling your own product. That's an entirely different marketing and sales problem than selling a service.
Okay, great, thanks. Our next question is from Eric. They're wondering, what happens if the market for the one thing you get really, really good at, like say being an art director for print lifestyle magazines, suddenly shrinks? How do you cultivate narrow positioning while guarding against technical or market, oh God, I'm going to butcher this word. You know what I'm saying.
Obsolescence, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, or your focus is event planning and COVID happens, right? Yeah, so there are risks associated with specialization because you're focused in one industry. I did an interview with Abby Downing from Superfan Company. Their whole focus was on helping artists cultivate their fan base, and particularly monetizing their live venues, and they got nothing to do for a while. So yeah, I would say a couple of things there. One is, the more specialized you are, the more it shrinks, the more you will be in demand, because they can't afford to hire the wrong people. Like you'll get more market share essentially, because you're the only go-to person. There won't be as many competitors, and so you can grab even more market share. So there is an upside there. If it's a completely dwindling industry, maybe that's eventually going to go out, then you may need to rethink your vertical. Or if it's just going through a tough time, like the Superfan Company right now with events not happening, if you can stick it out, and sticking it out means maybe you've saved enough money through being profitable that you can stick it out and scrap your way through. On the other side, there's so much benefit. I mean, on the other side of a downturn, when it comes back and you're one of the last man standing, that you can do extremely well. So there are some risks with the narrow positioning, because if you pick a market that's not surging, but I'd say that, any business decision you make, you're weighing risks and rewards. But I'd say the greater risk is in being a generalist. And if you try to compete as a generalist in a down market, you're even more in trouble. So I'd say the risk of picking a niche that might suffer a downturn is worth the risk. If you really press in during that time, you can grab more market share. And if you can survive on the other side, there's even more opportunity. So all things being equal, I'd say just stick it out and try to find ways to serve that market where perhaps other services you've offered aren't as in demand. Maybe there's other things you can do within that same niche to bolster your services in that area.
Great, thank you. Jean is wondering if LinkedIn is the best channel to connect with galleries, or do you think there's a better place to reach them?
Yeah, I think so. They're there. It's a professional service. It's a professional environment. It's easy to find them. So certainly starting there for sure. You can go to Artbase or Artbase. No, it's Art. Oh, I'm blanking now. There's an online site that lists almost every gallery, and you can usually get their email address from there as well, and you can reach out via email. But I would say with gallery owners, you have to pay attention to like, again, are they a really elite gallery? Are they a mid-level gallery? Are they an entry-level gallery? If they're entry-level, they'll be very open. If they're mid, you might have to be a little more savvy in how you approach them. And if they're elite, you pretty much have to get an introduction from somebody. But yeah, I think LinkedIn's a great place to start that, especially for the the entry level and the mid range galleries for sure.
Great, thank you. Our next question, and are you good on time, Eric? I don't want to
Yep.
keep you longer. Okay.
Yep.
I'm a freelancer that's been working by word of mouth really well prior to the pandemic. And now I feel like I need to start marketing myself outside the scope of word to mouth. However, I've been doing a range of logo design and rebranding, web and print designs, and retouch post-production work. Do you feel that range is still too general?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, you definitely need to focus in order to market effectively. And most creatives get their work through word of mouth. Uh, I'm about to post an article tomorrow to my website about what it means to sell the invisible, and creativity is really selling the invisible. And when it comes down to it, when you're buying a service like creativity and not a product like a computer, um, you it's not tangible. You don't know what the quality is. And so when people hire, they hire based on trust when they hire a service, not so much on what they see in front of them, which is why most creatives get their work through word of mouth and referral, because that's trust based. You're borrowing the trust someone else has in you, and they're extending it to someone else. And that's why without actual marketing, you get most of your referrals through word of mouth. It's not a bad thing, except that you can't control it. You're passive. It happens when it happens. You can't make it happen, except begging your network to make referrals. But that could do something, but it's not great. So yeah, you want to break out of that cycle of depending on word of mouth, so you can control your marketing. You can go after your market. You can cultivate opportunities and find better clients. And yeah, as far as that range, yeah, you need to focus in on one of those areas, and maybe even a subset of one of those areas. So even web design can be general, or print design. The more focused you can get both on the horizontal and the vertical. And again, keep in mind, this is not that you can't do any of those things. If you happen to get a word of mouth referral and you want to do it, go for it. But for marketing, just pick one. Pick your favorite, or the one that you feel like you do the best work in, or it makes the most money, and then find a niche, find a particular industry or common problem, and then zero your marketing efforts in on that one thing. And then you could actually be doing something even as you're waiting for other referrals to perhaps come in.
Great, thank you. Alice is wondering, do you have enough knowledge of the fine arts market to be able to address the question of whether individual artists are still beholden to work through galleries, or if it may be true that we can market our work ourselves online?
I still think it's gallery driven. Again, it depends on the nature of your work. Some work is like the more representational work. If you do landscape painting or something, it has an appeal that any buyer can just say like, oh, I just love that, and it's a painting of that place I always love to go, right? So you could potentially build your own market. But if you're dealing with abstraction, expressionism, anything that's more contemporary, it's funny how that market works. The influence of the gallery director in selling your work to a prospect is it's interesting. so it's really hard to sell that kind of work directly. So I do think because of that, it's that trust thing I just mentioned, right? If you really have a lot of money and you want to buy some expensive art, and there's a lot of the buyers out there, they don't know how to buy art. They just want something impressive to hang on their wall of the new big house they have in the Hamptons. They depend on their gallery owner to point them in the right direction, because they're going to drop a whole lot of money and they don't want to be embarrassed. It's kind of pragmatic in a lot of ways. So they're trusting the gallery owner because they can't trust their own ability to judge the talent of the person who happens to just have work that they like, but what do they know? So that when you're buying, especially if it's expensive art, that trust that the gallery owner has with their buyers, that's huge. That's what they have. They don't have walls to put art on and a space to walk off the street. They have relationships with people who buy expensive art. and those people trust them to point them in the right direction. And so really, you've got to cultivate those same relationships with those galleries. They really are the brokers of fine art. And I don't really see that changing very much. The channels they use to sell are changing and evolving, but I still think a lot of that, especially on the higher end, is going to be brokered through gallery directors.
Okay, great. We're down to our last two questions, so we'll cap it at these two.
Okay.
Will is saying specialization is risky. For example, firms dedicated to restaurants were all out of work in March 2020.
Yeah.
What are your
You mentioned the
thoughts?
restaurants, right? Yeah. Yeah, like I said, it is risky. There are firms that are focused on event marketing or on restaurants, and they definitely have had a tough time of it and will for some time to come. Uh, that is a risk, and you just have to weigh it like anything else. So you have to weigh the risk. Am I going to pick an industry that is that's going to suffer, and then I'm going to suffer with it, and it's going to be hard to pivot at that point because I've invested so much, because that's the offset there, that's the trade-off, over against generalist marketing. And I would say, I'm persuaded, I've been doing it long enough and done it enough times where because generalist marketing is just goes absolutely nowhere and you have no control whatsoever, it's worth the risk. But you should be mindful that there is that risk, and there are pivots you can make when you are in an industry that's really hit. Like if restaurants are struggling, you can pivot a little bit, and you can start talking about, how can you make takeout work to get through? How can you accelerate that with whatever? Again, I'm not a specialist in restaurants, but if you are a specialist in restaurants, then you probably will know, or you'll be able to say things like, okay, this is going to be tough, but you need to be ready for as soon as you can open, because you're going to need to do this, this, and this. And we're putting together a package, and we're going to let our clients pay us in Q4 because, we know the situation, but you need this kit because it's going to help you to accelerate your reopen, because it's going to be a hard time. Anyway, you'd be a specialist, you know how to make the most of it. But I'm not going to deny that there are risks, but there's always risks in every business model. I just think the risks that could happen are worth it and way lower than the risk of sticking with generalist, because that isn't going to work, basically.
Okay, great. Thank you. So our last question, for using LinkedIn as your marketing tool, are there strategies I can use in terms of who to connect or send messages to? For example, my main market is, again, art galleries. Should I target to connect with directors and owners, or should I try and connect with as many people as possible? I feel that often it's best to connect with people with higher positions, but maybe it's more important to grab someone's attention. And they
Mhm.
say thank you in advance.
Mhm. Yeah. Again, so like galleries, there's kind of 3 tiers, and maybe more than that, but there's the high end, in which case you probably do want to get any connection you can, because you're not going to get to the director or the owner. There's so many gatekeepers. The mid tier, you could reach out directly, and again, some of their gallery associates may be perfectly good to reach out to. And on the lower end, you probably want to try to get to the owner, because you don't want to waste time with interns that don't have any influence there. But by and large, there's really no harm in connecting with anybody in the space, because again, even if it's just a lower level person that perhaps isn't going to get you an in, just the fact that they are connected to other people in the gallery, they have friends who work at galleries, and so by connecting to them, you now are a secondary connection to them. It's totally worth it. So there's really no harm connecting with a gallery associate. But you probably wouldn't want to waste a lot of time personally following up with that person. Just connect. You're connected. It opens up even more secondary connections that you could leverage, and that's good enough. It doesn't hurt to do it anyway. So.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Somebody also suggested that you might have been thinking of Art Basel earlier.
Yeah, there's that. There's a couple of different ones, but because I be marketing museums, we also do a little bit toward galleries, and I had a couple of sources that I pulled some lists together from, and that was one of them. But yeah, I can't quite remember what that is. but you can use those as well to try to find some contacts and then do more direct outreach. But yeah, thanks so much. I'm glad to have been able to engage with you all, and hope a lot of this stuff was helpful.
Thank you, Eric. And just for everybody's knowledge, we will be posting a copy of this recording on the RISD Alumni website, as well as a recording from last week's webinar. And if you are interested in learning more about Eric, I highly encourage you to visit his website, ericholter.com, as well as his podcast, 5 Minutes on Creative Entrepreneurship, and his book, Blazing the Freelance Trail. Eric, as always, thank you. And until we meet again, I'll see you soon. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.